Yeah.
We on? Look for the light, huh?
There you go. Now we're live.
Welcome to the City Council meeting of Centerville City on May 1st, 2018. Meeting is now in session. Let's begin with the roll call of our City Council members.
Present.
Present. Do you want our names? Meekum.
Yes, please.
McEwen. Present.
Three of the five present, Councilwoman Ivy and Councilwoman Fillmore, have already contacted us, and they will not be here, but we do have a quorum present.
Barely.
Barely, yeah. So we'll start with a prayer by myself, and then after that we'll go to the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father in heaven, we're very grateful for this opportunity that we have to be here this evening. We're thankful for the beautiful weather that we have outside. We're grateful for the chance that we have as a city to govern and to take care of those resources that Thou has blessed us with. Help us this evening to be able to have clear minds and to be able to have a good discussion with good thoughts and good processes. Bless those in our city that are struggling with any type of illness that may be set upon them, that they may be able to receive Thy strength. And these things we say, do so in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. So if you'd all stand, join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is the time on the agenda, and I hope you all noticed before we go into that, if you didn't when you came in, that tree out in our parking lot on the northeast side is just gorgeous right now. It's amazing. Spring is such a beautiful time of year, but it's just in bloom, looking wonderful. But this is the time for the open session of our meeting, and this is the time when any topic can be brought up. We encourage you, if you're going to speak of the open session, to keep your comments to 2 minutes. This is different than later in the meeting when we have public hearings on 3 issues. This is just anything that wants to be discussed. So if you're going to come up for the open session, come to one of these 2 podiums and state your name and where you're from. And so that I now open it up for the open session, if anything that anyone would want to come to the mic and discuss. Okay. If no comments, then I will close the open session. We'll head to the business of the meeting at this point in time. And first item of business is the minutes review and acceptance from the April 17, 2008 council meeting minutes. And I would open it to the council members. Any discussion on those changes?
I do have an amendment to page 5. And this could be appended to line 7. My primary concern, and I'll state it this way, is that the use of eminent domain for recreation purposes is a dangerous precedent.
So where were you at?
Page 5, line 7. Says Councilman McEwen commented he feels it is important to maintain local food sources. And we can do that as a separate sentence. He felt that using eminent domain for recreation purposes was a dangerous precedent.
Okay. We have that noted. Thanks, Katie. Any further changes, discussion?
Motion to accept the minutes as amended.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Appears it's unanimous. Thank you for that. Let's move to the next item on the agenda, which is the summary action calendar. There's 5 items on the summary action calendar, and with the summary action calendar, we take a motion in a second, and then we do a roll call vote, unless there's, so do we have a motion on the summary action calendar?
I did have one question on the summary action calendar on the water line easement for Quick Quack. How do we get to them having a building up and not knowing the water demand, that they need that other easement? I'm just trying to figure out how that's sequenced.
I'm going to look to Lisa because I was not involved in this matter.
And I may have to ask Mr. Fred Hale, who is here. Well, my understanding is that they just needed an extra water line across a piece of the access lane towards Colonial, which actually used to be part of Quick Quack, but then they did a lot line adjustment. So just to finish that off, we needed part of the easement towards on the Colonial property for the Quick Quack piece. But I'm not sure why.
So I'm going to speculate, and Fred, you can clarify, but I assume that's a second connection? They have a connection out to 400 West, and the connection to the main that comes down your driveway is the second connection, isn't it? For probably for fire flow purposes, that kind of thing.
So their consumption stays the same as what, or were they doubling up on their consumption with 2 inlets?
I don't think it was to increase capacity as much for, was it? Was it? Oh, Corey's here. I could have asked Corey this.
I didn't hear you.
I didn't even see you, Corey. Sorry. I would have asked you to come up.
Yeah, if you think of the car wash versus the kinder care, they have a much higher demand for water. And so part of the development is to supply that water, and Kevin went and Randy review that supply and arrange for the construction of the water line.
Okay, yeah, I was just confused as to the sequencing. It seems like the easement should have been done before the property went up, but is that
No, it's
can
coming
happen in any
after the
order?
property's been developed. You've had a demolishing, it's been approved for a new use, and as part of the approval of the new
Okay.
use, you have to upgrade the infrastructure.
Just wanted to make sure that I understood the sequence on that. Thank you.
Corey? Second question on George's item. It's my understanding that they have very stringent rules imposed by the state about the volume of water that can be used and about recycling water.
Right.
And that at the end of the day, they don't really use that much water. Is that?
Well, they do. They recycle the water, but there is a loss in the recycling to degrees, so they upgrade that for pressurization and the volume amount for use. It goes into a tank, it recycles, but there is some loss in the recycling because it evaporation, drainage, off to the travel lanes and so forth. So there is some loss to the water, but there is
But it's relatively.
Yeah, think of
In
like
comparison to the total volume of washing a car, it's
Yeah,
relatively minor.
Right. Think of a fire line. If you have a demand flow, the demand flow is greater than the size line for just running the faucets and everything else inside a building. In this case, the demand is great, but then they will recycle that water and pump it, and then as it dissipates, they resupply. But it's just the amount of water and the pressure that they need to deliver is the upgrade.
Okay.
Any further questions on any of the other items on the summary action calendar?
I had some question about the firefighter surviving spouse trust fund.
Steve, do you want to answer that?
Well, sure, or Lisa can
Is
help
that
me.
for
This
Lisa?
you approved initially last year, but there were some changes in state law that required that the cities and the fire agencies enter into a new agreement, and I'll let Lisa explain what
Sure, I'm
those
happy
were.
to handle that. I told the chief I could handle this one, so he didn't have to come, so. Are you just wondering what the agreement is? And yes, we did enter into one of these last year. Up until I think this last legislative session, it was optional to enter into this surviving spouse benefit, and essentially the benefit is provided by the state that if a firefighter or law enforcement officer loses his life while in duty, active duty, then their family has a surviving spouse trust fund for them. And so it was optional, and now it's mandatory, which I think is a good thing. But we were already a member of this. And the changes, they're asking us to enter into a new agreement this year. It's substantially the same as the one we entered last year, only there's 2 amendments that, in my opinion, benefit the city and our officers. The first is it had a retroactive date till July 2015. With this new amendment, it will be retroactive to 2005. Luckily, we haven't lost any officers, so that won't be applicable to us, but some other communities it will. And let's see, the second one is that the cities or the local agency was required to pay for health insurance for 2 years for the surviving family, and the state has agreed to pay one of those 2 years, so now local agencies only have to pay 12 months of insurance.
And then the trust fund kicks in and pays it thereafter.
Trust fund kicks in. So this has been something we're involved in, and we have to send them the list of the number of participating officers along with our premium for that. But it's a low-cost benefit.
Well, I'm glad we were able to participate before it became mandatory. I think it's appropriate that we signal to the officers and to the first responders that they matter in our community. I actually think it's kind of unfortunate that they had to make it mandatory. What community wouldn't participate in that? That seems kind of odd to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I agree with George.
Thank you. Any further questions about any of those 5 items on summary action?
I would make a motion to approve the 5 items on the summary action calendar.
I'd second that.
Okay, we need to do a roll call vote, starting with Councilman McEwen.
Aye.
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 Passes 3-0. Great. On to item 3. This next item is a public hearing for general plan amendments in the southeast Centerville, Pages Lane commercial area. We will start this off by a staff presentation. I believe Corey Snyder, our Community Development Director, will do the staff presentation.
I'm not sure how much the council wishes for me to recap. You are posting this for a public hearing, so I assume some recap is needed for the project. As you're aware, about a year ago, we started the process of looking at the southeast community area. There's 3 sections in that southeast community area. There's the residential areas, there's the Pages Lane commercial, and there's the portion of Main Street on the east side that's within this community. We've addressed, well over a year ago, the residential. Key component in reminding the residential is that Pages Lane, north side of Pages Lane, used to be in the commercial area under the language. The north side has now been included into the residential component. You have passed those edits, and so now the Pages Lane area to be described is the south side of Pages Lane, the east side of Main Street, and the west side of 400 East to the Bountiful Centerville boundary on the south side of the city. So it's essentially that major super block area of the commercial that has been in place for a number of years. We're readdressing the future potential of those uses as part of our update to that community plan. Planning Commission went through a lengthy process. They made several recommendations to you. The highlight of those was the issue of a city park. As we've gone through the process, the language for the city park has been removed. And so now we are just simply discussing commercial uses and is there future opportunity if those commercial uses remain vacant or deemed at some point not viable anymore, is there opportunity to transition to other uses. And so the general plan language is not rezoning property at this time. It is a guide to the future. It's the vision of what potentially could be there. The premise of the edits is that the existing commercial is recognized in place.
Corey, we do have an aerial now if you want to refer to it.
Yeah, I'll get to that. So here's your super block, the Desert Industries, 3D Video, the pizza, the now Jackson's gas station from the old Steak and Shake. Then you have the vacated Dick's Market. You do have Dick's Ace, the old Rogers Memorial, and then the U-shaped shopping center and the corner cleaners and Domino's. Those are basically the area we're talking about. In the current version of your general plan, this is one entire block slated for commercial use. That's where it's at today in the language. The consideration is what should we consider into the future? And what the essential language says is instead of treating this all as one entire area of commercial, the edits show that we'll split this into two sectors. I've tried to create a better word than blocks. The sectors are basically down the center, and you have the east side sector up to 400 East, and you have the west side sector to Main Street. And so now the language would divide that to super block into two potential futures.
And Corey, what's the approximate area when you split those down the middle?
I don't know the DI site by chance. The east side is about 8 acres, so you're looking roughly in the same realm. It's not probably quite 50-50, but it's pretty close to that. So I'll address the western segment of the general plan. That is recognizing that the commercial uses appear to be viable today and would remain in place. There is options for the future, and to kind of set that up, if you look at the Main Street Corridor Plan that was adopted in 2008 and eventually modified several times, the original South Main Street called that the gateway. So it's a south gateway entering into the city. That gateway recognizes the commercial. That gateway also allowed a mixed use. That mixed use residential density has been the controversial part of that plan for 2 to 3 years now. Early on, nearly 3 years ago, in that controversy, the mixed use was taken away for the time being. So right now, the language is strictly commercial use. What is added back in under the current language is an opportunity for mixed use in two scenarios. The first one is maybe look to the Main Street corridor and consider that type of mixed use. I know it's controversial, but that corridor plan is still in place right now. So it says, look to that mixed use type, gateway mixed use, if you want. If that's not a satisfactory mixed use, if there needs to be additional synergy, look at some other type of mixed use. So basically it's saying it's commercials in place. We recognize that for the near future, if not potentially long-term future. But thinking 15, 20 years down the road, if there's a deterioration of the commercial, the language is saying synergize that with some potential mixed-use ideas. And I think it's the mixed-use ideas that may be the area of debate of that plan. I'm making that assumption in advance of your debate. The east half, this is where we've made several edits in the last couple of months talking about should it stay commercial, should it not? And you've had comments from the property owner a few times talking about please leave it commercial. We want to look at some potential commercial uses in the area. If you change the language in the general plan to residential, it might come across as the commercial is not viable anymore, and to attract interest in commercial is not what we want. At your last meeting, and I'm editorializing what I heard, so I may not have it perfect. The last meeting you had from the property owner, as I understood, is, well, we think we can develop it with some commercial. It'll take some time to develop it as commercial, but we think we can do it over time if the new format of commercial comes on board. And the example was, what if an Amazon Go store could be located here? Maybe that would be a new type of commercial that may take some time for technology to catch up and re-synergize the commercial. As I recall, though, they said, but be aware, in the interim, before these other commercial uses, we can fill it with some commercial uses, but it may struggle for a little while into the future till we can fill it out as commercial. Their other statement is if you want to go to residential, if that's the vision of the city to go towards residential, we would like a residential medium, but we'd like it at the old 8 units per acre rather than the new. That I heard from them in that discussion. During that last discussion, the council, there was some language that was fairly strong about moving towards residential in a fairly, there's no time frame, but the idea is it's been vacant for a long time, so let's move it towards residential a little sooner if the market will go that direction. You've asked staff to soften that language to allow that commercial to have some anchoring potential as at the request of the owner and at the existing infrastructure that's in place. So we softened that language and said, okay, now we recognize it's commercial. And so long as it can go to commercial, that's a direction that we'll allow it to go. You did say, though, the future may hold some residential if somehow that commercial doesn't take place. It can't get its synergy. What should it be? So we left the language in that it would be residential medium. Residential medium today is capped at 6 units an acre, so it reflects that into the language. But here's the caveat to moving to residential. The caveat is it's not a simple rezone to residential medium and then come in with the development. It has 2 factors to it. First, well, actually 3. The first one is we want it as part of a PDO process. We don't want it just to rezone and then see what happens. You want it as part of a plan development overlay, is the acronym, and that's a legislative decision as part of a rezone. So that would then say a person has to come to you and say, look, we think we're ready to go to residential. Here's the concept plan that we're going to convert it to residential. And the council will be a part of that along in partnership with the Planning Commission to do that. The caveat to doing that is a PDO is 5 acres. So if you're looking at an 8-acre area that could potentially transition, it would take a substantial amount of property to convert to residential in that plan development overlay process. As I had several discussions, the Dix Market area is about 3 acres. So to get to the 5 acres, you either have to take property to the east or you have to take property to the west. There's no way east or west has enough acreage at 5 acres. It will involve the vacant store if it's not filled and some additional property to get to 5 acres. And so that's the caveat to converting to residential. The other caveat to converting to residential is the concept that there might be some leftover commercial. And so it's talking about the preferred direction is from 400 west to the center to convert pattern. That may not happen, but it shows a preference to that conversion. The other conversion is you can't take a piece of property, build a 10-foot wall around it, and not integrate the rest of the property in the future. So the concept is if they converted, for example, is the south side of the east area, this would remain commercial, but you want to see a layout that says as that other commercial declines, it can be easily absorbed in with its roads, its streets, its landscaping, its design with the additional property. You can't just wall it off with a great big wall and isolate that residential, the first piece of residential to be developed. And so that's the design. So that's the summary of the language, and you wanted us to notice it for a hearing. So we put out the mailers, we put out the signs on the corner, had to use the park strip so it wouldn't appear that it's on someone else's property being rezoned. We put those out yesterday to notify.
Where did the mailers go?
Property owners and business owners.
Not only on site, but immediately adjacent, wasn't it? Was it the...
Anybody that had frontage on Main Street and
Pages?
Pages.
Yeah.
Or ran a business in that area.
Any further questions for staff? There's no applicant on this, so there's not an applicant presentation. So that means that I will now open it for public hearing. That means that any of you that want to address this issue can come to the microphones. Come up here, state your name and where you're from.
My name is Ryan Patton. I live on 795 South, 300 East, which is right here. And so I got to tell you, I lived here for 10 years. I love Centerville. Why did I pick Centerville over Layton? Layton was way too busy. Traffic was to the point where you couldn't even move in Layton. They've made substantial changes in their infrastructure to try to deal with the overload that they have in certain parts of the area. And it's still not fun traveling to Layton and other business areas. And right now, we're looking at all this over here, all these apartments over here. Me and my wife say we're never gonna move. We love the old Centerville area. And yet you're talking about putting 64 units right here. You know how much traffic 64 units is gonna create right here? And let's not forget to mention there's an elementary school right across the street. So when I hear about this, I'm freaking furious to the point where I would fight this tooth and nail because I don't want to have to move. And this isn't just me, this is my whole area frustrated over this because this is a really calm, quiet area, and to have this rezoned into residential and create that much more traffic is out of this word. I'm pro company. I love businesses in the area. We moved into the area with Dick's Market there, and it was a wonderful store. Didn't have a lot of crime or problems, but long term, I think this would be a huge mistake to turn that into a residential piece of property. You know, park would be great, but Centerville is known for being a calm, peaceful city that we love, and not a residential or a huge commercial city as Layton is. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it. Any further comments on this
Question
public?
for Corey. Can you clarify what's the maximum we could end up with?
It's a little over 8 acres.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to make sure we have clarity on that.
I don't remember, it's like 8.19, so you're 48 or so at 6 units an acre.
Okay.
And just to clarify, this is a general plan amendment, not a rezone or map
Right.
amendment.
I just wanted to make sure we're reactive to comments and have clarity where we can.
My name's Nikki Ellis, and I live on 495 Pages Lane, just east of this location. And I just wanted to know, I was here last year at this meeting when we originally were talking about possible parks and other cemetery and other possibilities with this area, knowing that the cemetery is full and there needs to be an expansion maybe into Island View or somewhere. So I wanted to know why the park idea was removed. Can someone explain that?
You want me to come?
Who wants to address that? Bill, are you saying you do? Sorry, Councilman Ince.
We did everything we could to explore options on park and cemetery. Basically, we can't just take someone's property to do it. And the property owner is looking for about, if I remember the numbers correctly, $2 million for that property, and it becomes an extremely expensive park. The possibility of looking at the park on the east side of the cemetery as additional cemetery space was also explored. But when that park was developed about 40 years ago, we used some federal funds. With federal funds come strings, and if the park is decommissioned, it costs us something like $3 million in replacement property for what was decommissioned as a park. We already had a very serious year last year with a significant tax increase, which no one was happy about. And the price tag on those two potential projects that you mentioned would have been astronomical and required more tax increases, and just was not considered to be in the citizens' best interest, no matter how popular it would be.
No, they also explored just having smaller acre, like regular neighborhood acreage. Is that just not because the developer is not wanting to
We have a conflict with the developer. The developer is saying they can't make money on that property unless they go to 8 an acre, and they're asking for more. This gentleman was complaining about our number of 6 per acre, which is what our medium density, residential medium density number per acre is. So there's a disconnect. The developers are saying they can't make money at that. They want more density. We're pushing for smaller density if that becomes an eventuality. We're really hoping that the commercial will be able to reinvent itself and be salvaged, because most of the neighbors would prefer to see the property remain commercial.
So my name's Alan Sperry. I just live right next to Brother Ryan down the street. So I just have questions about it. If we change it to commercially, is the traffic going to be different than if we have, what was it, 64 units there? 48. If we have, well, that's at a density of 6, right? That's all the density. So if we bumped it up to 8, would we have more traffic because of that, or is commercial bringing a lot of traffic? I mean, you know, these are things that I wouldn't necessarily sit at home and worry about. I wouldn't even know if anybody's.
It's commercial presently.
Right, but if I could imagine like a sporting goods store there, the amount of traffic coming in, even a Walmart or something like that, the amount of traffic coming in seems to be like it would be a lot different than 84 units. So commercially seems like there's more traffic versus residential where there's going to be less traffic. Now the school might be overloaded with more, children there, because it probably, the smaller, newer families there and stuff like that. So maybe the school would be an issue. I mean, I don't know these things. I mean, how do I find this information out myself? I mean, we can sit around our little neighborhoods and complain and not know the issues.
I'll tell you, you have a good point, and that needs to be addressed, and I will find you the answers to that. Another thing you need to realize is going commercial, everybody would love to have the Old Dix Market there. But would you like to have an Amazon Go where you've got big trucks coming and going, bringing a lot of people from other areas into work? I mean, we have to look at both scenarios because it's really hard, and I don't know the answer. I'm just saying there's two sides to, just like you're saying, which is the traffic. I'm saying to you, the neighborhood wants commercial, but the commercial probably won't be commercial retail, because that's not, I mean, I know that they've tried really hard to market it for that. So I'm concerned about what commercial could come in there.
And I agree with Ryan. I want to keep it Centerville, not the newest, latest, and greatest industrial park. I mean, if residential creates that, then, and it's too bad that it's 8 makes money, 6 doesn't, but.
We just lowered our zoning. They could have had 8 just a couple of months ago, and this council just reduced their residential medium to 6. So we are trying to keep our densities in Centerville as low as possible.
One of the other things to remember, and I'm not sure how long you've lived there, is the traffic patterns have substantially changed over the last 6 to 7 years. Because when Dix was there, and when the theater was there were times when there was a lot of traffic in that parking lot and a lot of traffic on Pages Lane, and how much of it got to your street, I don't know. But all of that has disappeared over the last 6 years. So to some degree, the commercial has the history and the right to have that much traffic. I suspect as you're thinking about it, you're not remembering some of the traffic frustrations that may have been there prior to that when everything was still functioning. I know I used to go to the theater, and you were walking all the way across the parking lot and down almost to Main Street if they had a popular show on. If it was coming in on Saturday evening when the Dick's lot was full, you know, that whole parking area was full. And that's all traffic that would have been through the area that I suspect, after 6 years of not being there, nobody remembers.
That becomes a problem too, because now we want to keep it the low traffic. Can we turn it into a soccer field? Because right now my yard is completely surrounded by cars. I mean, the traffic's horrible where I'm at right now because of the soccer game at the elementary school.
I think there's another council that's dealing with that issue tonight with the word soccer field.
I told him to
It's
come
on the
down here and put it in
Farmington
Centerville.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Love to turn it into soccer fields. Would you like to make a donation so we can buy the land?
You took the words out of my mouth. Yes.
My name is Heather Mackenzie Campbell. I live at 579 East Pages Lane, a couple of houses away from Nikki. I've been there since 1992, and I really like the neighborhood because you can walk pretty much anywhere and feel like you're not going to get run over. I guess the traffic on Pages Lane in that area is a little bit better, not having Dick's there. I retired recently, so I'm riding my bike down to Legacy and up along there. I appreciate the signs. It says, like, look out for cyclists, a couple signs there. But what I noticed today, because I'm home now during the day, is traffic is thicker than it even used to be when Dick's was there. As far as when you get to 4th East and Pages, it's now 5 cars back instead of like 2. But I mean, we're really lucky that we have that. And listening to this discussion, I wouldn't want it to have an Amazon Go store if that is industrial in any way of bringing big trucks. I mean, there were big trucks delivering to Dick's. It was fantastic that you could walk down there to get groceries or whatever, and the closeness, because I really don't like going on Parish Lane, especially on a Saturday. We won't go out. And same with 5th South and Bountiful. So it would be ideal to have a smaller market, or, you know, Natural Grocers would have been nice, or Sprouts or something like that, where we had a neighborhood store to go to. But it seemed like the traffic at Dick's when it was open was mostly Saturday. It was really crowded, and when there were plays at Rogers Memorial Theater. But I think with all the fast-paced traffic, congestion, we should be looking at whatever commercials brought there, kind of add to the community, make it a place where people can kind of mingle with their neighbors. The mayor asked me if I knew someone that's my neighbor, and I don't know my neighbors well enough. But look at some of the neighborhoods in Salt Lake where they've made it to where you can walk. Like up on 15th East, there's little shops, restaurants. Instead of fast food, have something like that there. It would be really nice to have art boutiques. I don't know who wants to have some shops there, but I think there could be some draw for commercial that is maybe not such a high volume of traffic there. But I enjoy it because it feels like a small town still. And as far as the notice, I don't remember seeing it in the mail. I saw it today on the billboard on the corner, and learned about it from that and sent it out to a few of my neighbors on Pages Lane. I'm sure a lot of the neighbors in where some of these fellows live, I don't know if they got notice.
No, we saw it corner.
So I think there's a lot of people in the neighborhoods around there that would probably want to have input. So maybe if, as this goes forward, we could get notice a little sooner. An example of how that worked well was when we received information about the Bangeter Farm hearing in Davis County. We received several letters that they were having a hearing, and because we lived near the area, we were invited to that hearing. I thought that really worked well. But thank you for your time.
So I just wanted
Thank you, Heather.
to address your comment. One of the things that this is, public hearing is designed is to get some feedback, because this is a change to the planning document. This doesn't actually change any zoning at all. So this process could take a lot longer. So I hope that it's not in your mind that this was the only public notice and this thing is done. I just wanted to make sure that,
I was here a year ago too with Nikki.
yeah, so
where
this is just a continuation of that same process. This could
we
go
were
on a while.
hoping for a park.
Thanks. Any more from the public hearing?
Honorable Mayor and City Council, thanks for this opportunity. My name's Scott Bowling. I currently live at 1995 North 100 East. Within the next 2 months, my wife and I, along with 5 additional residents, will be moving to the new townhomes that are located at 323 East Pages Lane. There's the pointer. It's right there, adjacent and across the street from this property. Of course, we're very interested in what takes place on this site. Perhaps we can consider the worst case scenario for a moment. What is the worst use of this property? Other than possibly an industrial zone, it would probably be vacant, declining, unused commercial property, acres of deteriorating asphalt pavement, park strips that are filled with the same deteriorating asphalt, no trees, no shrubs, no vegetation or grass. The only vegetation is the weeds that are sprouting up in the cracks in the asphalt. Banner signs along the frontage that haven't been in service for years, such as the Center Point Theater, an RV sewage dump station that has been locked up and out of service, sagging overhead power lines draped across the road, blacked out windows in front of the stores. I'm sure you get the picture. It wouldn't be very difficult to find a better use than what is currently in place. But we have had several plans, several public hearings, several studies and plans, and now it has been over 8 years since Dick's Market has relocated and the conditions continue to decline. We need now as an action plan something progressive that starts to move some dirt. We need forward thinking on parts of the owners and the city that will allow something, almost anything, to be accomplished. To start off this thinking, maybe I can give you 3 suggestions. Perhaps the owner could present a plan that contains beautification on Pages Lane, includes landscape berms, wider planting strips, that allow trees, increase setbacks, decorative lighting, and eliminate some of the unsightly overhead power, minimize signing to serve those that serves the current properties, and not pole signs on the frontage road, on the frontage. Hopefully this plan will include the cooperation of all the properties and not just spotty improvements. Number 2, if the owner is willing to make these types of concessions, then the city council should be willing to do everything possible to assist in getting things moving. Please be open-minded about this. Consider options that may include increased densities of 12 to even 16 units per acre. Consider multi-unit and multi-use options. It is not difficult to see that if you restrict this property to single-family homes with 6 units or less per acre, then each unit will have to bear a reclamation and demolition cost of $100,000 or more before beginning any new construction. Is it any wonder that nothing is being done? It is the current proposal appears to be placing a Band-Aid on the property that is experiencing internal hemorrhaging. You may need to cut a little deeper before you can find a cure. The third thing I recommend, it is my experience that we have a well-qualified and well-trained professional planning staff currently employed by the city. Let's lean on their expertise and give them the freedom and encouragement to move forward and make things happen. Cut them loose and see what they can come up with. So is this council going to continue to ascertain study after study and plan after plan, continuing to hold tight to a noble yet pie-in-the-sky concept such that 4 years from now, all we have to show for the efforts is the same declining conditions that we have experienced for the last 4 years. And the site will look once again worse
than the day you were elected. Or as I suggest, you work together, compromise, get the ball moving, be progressive, be an action council, and get something done that starts moving the dirt. Thanks for your considerations.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any more public hearing comments? Any staff response? If there's, come up to the mic.
This is Nikki Ellis again. I live on 495 East Pages Lane. I just have a question. If it becomes housing, we do have an elementary school across the street, and we're already over full and take kids even from clear over by the movie theaters and stuff. So normally right now, south of Pages Lane goes to Tolman Elementary. Would these kids, I mean, there's going to be children in those. I'm just wondering if there's a plan for that as far as, you know, we already have a very full school there. So have they considered that at all?
That's totally the school district. We have no say over that.
Oh, okay. So they just, thanks.
And for what it's worth, the school district says there's plenty of room. Can I make a comment? Go ahead.
Come on up.
Mr. Bowling, you might wait 1 minute.
So once again, this is Ryan Patton at 795 South, 300 East. So, Mr. Ballard, no offense to you, okay, but a lot of my neighbors, we even think that the property where this gentleman's moving into is a little bit confined and a little bit built heavy. Beautiful place, you know, I love the way it looks. But what happens to these places 20 years down the road? Who keeps them up? When you have huge conglomerate apartment complexes, 20 years down the road, they're falling apart. I mean, it happens everywhere. So, you know, that's kind of our concern. Even though it even is 6, when it runs down, the whole area just falls down to the wayside. So that's just the comment I wanted to make too.
Thank you.
May I?
Yes.
So
Close the
we
public
close the
hearing.
public hearing
Yes.
piece.
Any more comments? If not, then we will close the public hearing. There's no applicant response to the public comment, so Councilman Itz, yes, it's appropriate now.
I was just going to comment. Sometimes it seems like things move extremely slowly. One of the reasons this has moved as slowly as it has is that the owner of the property is begging us to leave it alone. He'd like to be able to develop it, redevelop it as commercial, and anything that we do, he believes will compromise that. Property rights are a very sensitive and significant issue. And in trying to be respectful of those, I suspect it will be a slower process than some people would like. Hopefully, at the end of the day, the owners of the property are happy and the neighbors are happy.
And when it comes down to the whole discussion of appropriate use, value of the land, you'd have to be completely buried in the sand not to catch all the articles about how this is the hottest market in the country, millennials can't buy homes. You know, that I really have a hard time believing if they scraped that off and put homes on there that they couldn't sell it. I would be really shocked that that was the case. In this whole process, what has been interesting is that when we discuss the concept of, well, what are some alternatives? Let's give them some tools, maybe signal residential rather than commercial. Property owners showed up pretty quickly and came armed with his personal city planner to tell us how wrong we were for even considering that, which to me wasn't helpful, because I'm trying to balance, you know, what I personally consider as a blighted property with appropriate uses in the community and property rights and all of that. And in this particular arena, these amendments to the general plan, I don't think handcuff the property owner, But they do signal from a city perspective, we would like you to do something that's appropriate to the area, that brings something to the area. As it is right now, it doesn't bring a lot. I think it drags the area down. So, and I generally don't address members individually, but relative to the density, I'll just tell you, when you said the density numbers you did, my heart just went, what? And the reason why is because I look at 4th South right now in Salt Lake, and I'm seeing this trend of where the mountains are disappearing under these higher and higher structures with more and more density. And I personally, as part of my platform in running for office, was I wanted to make sure that Centerville didn't turn into Anywhere USA. I really did. And I still feel very strongly about that. But in that, we have to be circumspect about what is appropriate to our area and the change that is taking place. When I got here, there wasn't a Walmart. It was a field, and boy, there was a lot of rancor about what was coming. Do I think that was great for the community? 60-40, ask me on the particular day when I'm stuck in traffic. But overall, I think that what we're doing in terms of signaling is appropriate.
Thanks.
Off soapbox. Back to meeting. Sorry.
Do we have any motion on this?
I appreciate the input. Would have hoped for significantly more. We're missing 2 council members. I would say this needs to be tabled for additional discussion in 2 weeks.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Let's have a roll call, starting with Councilwoman
Meekum, aye.
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 Motion to discuss it further passes 3-0. Thank you. Let's go to item number 4 on our agenda. This is the public hearing for zoning code amendments on the hillside overlay and impervious surface requirements. I believe we have staff present, Corey Snyder, to present.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. As we move on to consider this, I'll try to set it up for you. I apologize. This is kind of a tricky code regulation to describe, and the Planning Commission said, I didn't understand what you were doing in your report until you made a presentation. So if you're in the dark as the Planning Commission was, I apologize, but it is a little easier to verbally describe the regulation than try to write it. So I'll begin with here and just summarize. The Planning Commission has recommended support in this, and that recommendation to the Planning Commission also included staff support for the change. So we'll start out to try to explain the process. I'll simplify it. Think of a flat, typical lot, a flat land, cookie cutters, the description. So whatever zone you're in, you create a lot. It's flat. We predict the drainage off the property, set the impact fees to that amount, and we regulate what we think is a relationship amount to how much of that lot can be used for your driveways, for your house, for your gazebos, for your tough sheds, for your RV parking, and anything else, including, I heard recently, pickleball courts using on your property. And so what we say in our ordinance is that no matter what size it is, on a flat piece of property, you can use 60% of your property for those improvements. You have to leave 40% in open space. That open space is your backyard, your side yards, your front yards, and any additional space that you want to plant and have a garden in. So you get to use 60% of your lot, 40% is in some type of landscaping, and that's the idea of the rainwater and everything else can go into the ground as well as beautify the lot so it's not all concrete. When we transition to the hillside, we flip that on its head. So no matter what lot you're in, this is what we say. We say, here's your lot, you get 5,000 square feet of build area. Or 40% of your lot. So we're switching it from 40. So we say in the hillside, you get 5,000 feet of area to cover with your improvements, or 40%, whichever is less. So if you're looking at a just quarter acre lot, 10,800 square feet, you won't hit 5,000. You're going to hit 43 something. So that's going to be less. And the concept of that is you're on a hill slope. drainage is changing. The drainage pattern is changing. And so we're concerned about that drainage pattern. We also have the issues of cuts and fills and some other things that we're concerned about in the hillside because you're now building on a slope. So we want to be careful on what you're building. And we have a graded range of up to 10%, up to 20%, and then above 30% is off limits. You can't use property above 30% for building improvements. So you take the case of Mr. Hale, who's provided this petition. He's an AL zone, so every lot he has a half acre, minimum size. And we say, under the current regulation, that half acre, you get 5,000 square feet because you'll exceed it. 5,000 is the less. So it doesn't matter what size your property is, once you go larger, you're restricted to the 5,000. Mr. Hale happens to have a personal lot in that development that he's building. That's an acre. Guess what Mr. Hale gets on that acre of lot? 5,000 square feet. That's all you get to develop. So the reason that we talked at a staff level when we arrived this at building permit with Mr. Hale's property is this, in our minds, encourages people not to do agricultural zones. Because you can divide, if the city council will, rezone to RL, and each lot gets 43, if your quarter acre lot's 4,300 square feet. And so you can get nearly 17,000+ square feet. It's just built among 4 homes instead of one single home. And that disparity is a cause of concern because you first have the issue of the rezoning of property. We're just saying that if you have this huge piece of property, you still can only use 5,000 square feet of it. And that seems to encourage people to think, well, then why don't I develop it into something different? The other thing that we looked at is if you have an acre lot, such as Mr. Hale, it encourages him to not put the bigger lots in his development and go to the half-acre lot everywhere in the subdivision, because then you can maximize some of that hillside into additional homes and additional RV parking. So we think that's a disincentive in the AL zone. The third item why we think this is an issue is because when we look at the hillside, and it's governed around the idea that most of the city is slated for RL zoning or quarter acre lots, the AL is an afterthought inside the hillside. It just, oh yeah, we have AL, let's do this, without really thinking through how that relates to the larger lots. And so what we've provided is, when we talked with Mr. Hale, is what do we do to solve this issue? We know that if you have 5,000 square feet, we have a predictable area to build, we have a predictable drainage, your impact fees are charged on that. What is there something that we can do to make up the issue of difference? And what we've concluded is why don't we add into the code that you're still at your 5,000 square feet. So if you don't want to do anything different, you're stuck at your 5,000 square feet. And you drain that out and we handle it, and there's your impact fee. If you want to go more than the 5,000 square feet, we don't, from a staff level, we still think the 40% in the hillside is a value. You know, we've reduced it 20% from the flat lot. We still think that 40% is a value. So could we do something between the 5,000 and the 40% that manages the property correctly? And the answer is on-site detention. If somebody could put in on a hillside their own on-site detention, capture that water, and then enter it into the storm drain system when the high flows have disappeared, then that handles the significant drainage issues with the property. The other thing that we felt that 40% was sacred, but we could hit the gap with some drainage infrastructure for each lot. If you design the detention for each lot, we can do that. The other thing that with the Development Review Committee, when they looked at it, was concerned about is, well, what if somebody has a piece of property, they got 5,000 square feet and a great big cliff behind them? Can they count the great big cliff into their calculations? And we said, well, that's beyond 30%. We'll develop at less than 10, we'll develop at less than 20, we'll develop at less than 30. There's different cuts and fills and calculations and stuff you have to use. But we don't want people using the 40% when they occupy so much cliff area. So we added a caveat that you can't include that in if you happen to have a piece of property that is extremely steep. The drainage calculation, though, is we normally do drainage calculations on a 10-year storm. So that's a moderate event. The drainage calculations in this case are set at a 25-year storm. So we're being more aggressive in the detention requirement for that lot. So they have to calculate it against a 25-year event rather than a 10-year event. And then we have 50 and 100. We very rarely use the 50 and 100. If we designed the entire system for a 100-year event, it would be very not cost effective, not only to install but to maintain. So we upped that to the 25%. So we think that resolves this disparity with the whichever less. And so with the help of Lisa, we came up with the language. You're at 5,000 square feet. You can go above the 5,000 square feet, but you're going to do this with your drainage, and you're still capped at the 40%, and you cannot use anything steeper than 30% into your calculation. And so that's the amendment, and it has the support from staff as well as the commission to you.
Response or questions for staff?
So just taking the raw numbers, if you have a 1 acre lot, what is the maximum square footage of impervious surface you're going to end up with at the 40?
We calculated that once.
I hope so, because I couldn't do the math while you were talking. So
We came to, I think if you use the RL, it was like 17.2 or 4, and
17,460.
and then if you did the agricultural at the acre at 40%, it was 18 something.
But in this case, you're saying he also has to have on-site detention, whereas in the RL zone, they don't, right?
No, I think this is written so that it is anything between the 5,000 and the 40% for anything in the hillside.
Yeah.
So in a 25-year event, it's going to take up more space on your RL lot, so you have to decide if you want to put that detention in on a much, much smaller lot. And we do on-site detention. That was one thing that a new commissioner asked us, is do we have this somewhere in the city? We do. With the meets and bounds lots in the old areas that are on the downslope, because we didn't handle drainage infrastructure in those older days, they provide on-site detention when they develop those lots as part of their site plan approval. So we do require it in those circumstances on the meets and bounds lots. So it's not unusual is what I'm trying to say.
Any further questions for staff? Corey, thanks. At this time, there is an applicant. I don't know if the applicant wants to speak or not.
Hi, I'm Fred Hale. I live on 1750 North, 63 West.
Pull that up, Fred, pull that up to you.
Okay, is that better?
Okay.
Anyway, Corey and the staff has done a great job on accommodating. When I first went in to start the process to build this subdivision, I wasn't aware of the hillside ordinance being so strict on how much of a space you could build on. I think Corey did mention it to me, but it didn't click because it really didn't make any sense to me. I think the 40% is a lot better than the 5,000 square feet. That still leaves me with about 27,000 square feet of dirt or landscape, which I would like to, you mentioned pickleball. I'd like to put a pickleball court in there, and that's part of it, but that takes away, that's part of the about 18,000 square feet that I'd be using as a pickleball court, so that would be out. Unless I could use some kind of impervious concrete, which they do make it.
So it's pickleball part of the year swimming pool during the spring?
Could be, yeah. But the swimming pool is pervious, so that I think we count that. But anyway, I agree with what Corey has said. I'd like to make a comment to maybe even up that to 60%, which would be impervious, if I can retain and release my storm water easily. So anyway, we have designed that subdivision to where, we have a retaining wall all the way along the west side, so all the storm runoff water will be captured and not going into the neighbors down to the west. Anyway, I think that could be designed to where I could. I mean, not right now. I'm happy with the 40% right now, but I may want to put that pickleball court in and some other things. So, anyway, thanks. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you, Fred. At this point in time, then, we will open it up to a public hearing. Anyone can make any comment. The public hearing is now open. If nobody come into the mic for the public hearing, we will close the public hearing. And is there any response from staff at all, Corey, or not? Okay. So, council?
Can I ask Corey a question? Is there any enforcement on the 60% generally? Let me say that again. Let me say it differently. Subsequent to the initial building permit, is there any enforcement on the 60%?
That's a fair question. Obviously, when somebody comes in initially develop it, all those numbers are checked. Could somebody exceed that? Yes, because flat work concrete doesn't require a building permit. So until it becomes a structural issue, you don't require a building permit. The other thing is anything less than 200 square feet doesn't require a building permit. So I would venture to yes, because we've had a situation arise when somebody came back in with a request where they far exceeded the 60%, and it was kind of a mess to go through. So the enforcement, it would be, one, we do a complaint. So somehow somebody was able to show that they're over it and submitted a complaint to the city, we would do some enforcement on that. The second one is you get caught. You come in and you do some flat work for your RV pad, then you do some additional pad work in the back, and then you finally come in with your wood shop, and we ask for the site plan. And during that process, we generally will try to look at the old record, an aerial photo, and their plans to see what's going on and see if we can catch it. That's how an individual did get caught. They added 3 buildings, a swimming pool, and some other things. Those were fine, but it's all of the awnings that were connected that they added later that created the problem, and we ended up in an enforcement/appeal process in that case. So the enforcement comes as you get caught or somebody complains.
Okay. And how much difficulty, and I happen to be sympathetic. So you've said 60 to 40 will take away the 5,000 and give you 40 of the full acreage.
Is there other wiggle room?
What if I were to propose, Corey, you ought to think about 50?
That was asked at the Planning Commission. And so our response to it is there's some merit to considering that, and here's how some merit would be. But I think it would take us further study and response. See, we were responding simply to an application of an individual and did not become more expansive. If you wanted to go more expansive, we would have to analyze, get with our city engineer, look at how all the calculations and our impact fees are looked at, and I think there's some room to say, okay, if you're 10% or less, this is your number. If you're 20% or less, this is your number. If it's 30% or less, this is your number. But I think that takes a lot more effort, and I don't think the applicant was wanting to go through that a lot more effort, and I can't say how staff would weigh out on that. When we looked at the face value, the Development Review Committee was comfortable staying at the 40 for now, if that's the request. If we want to be expansive, we need some more analysis.
Okay.
So could there be some room? The answer is yes. What will that number be? Is it from 40 to 45 to 50? Is it from 40 to 50 to 60? Above 20%, it's 40, 50 from 10 to 20, and 60%. It just takes a lot more staff time to to decide if we want to be expansive.
Do we even look at anything if it's between flat and 10%? So the first step is at 10%.
Well,
if someone comes in at 8, they don't have a limitation.
The limitation is where the boundary of the overlay is. So we do have lots out there that are at large, much greater grades. We have lots that are 10 or 11%. But they're not listed in the hillside. The hillside regulates an overlay and says all of this area now will be in these 3 categories. And so right now the generic is, doesn't matter what your category is, it's 5,000 square feet or 40%, whichever's less.
So let me throw out a general question, and Lisa, you might bite on part of this because I'm going to use the word liability, and you'll probably have the other. When we're talking about these on-site retention designs, what liability does the city have in terms of approval, long-term viability of the drainage plan and the retention? Do we carry any liability and sign off for that?
Well, I think the engineer is going to look at them, but they're private systems, so we essentially say they're private facilities that have to be maintained by the homeowner before we accept the water into our public system. And that's where we draw the line on all of our water lines and other systems.
So the issue would be is if they failed to maintain it, then that would be an enforcement issue at that point.
Corey, I'd like to tell you, I think you did an excellent job on protecting the city and helping them be able to develop. So I'm very impressed with the...
Thank you.
And you don't get that from me really often, so
a
I just
capable
want you to
planner,
know
and I did a decent job.
I was very impressed, and I appreciate you looking after the city's needs but helping the citizen that needed help.
I'm recording this meeting and
So,
keeping it
thank
in
you.
perpetual.
It's on YouTube. You can distribute it to your friends.
Okay, good.
Go take your wife to dinner.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion on this?
Well, I was
Or
going
further
to, since
questions?
Corey's smiling this broadly, I was going to say, I agree. I think that anything we can do to incentivize the maintenance of green space and larger lots and RL on the hillside, I'm all for it. So I think this is a good compromise.
Thank you.
I would make a motion that we approve ordinance 2018-10 as it is written, but I at least would like to pose an amendment that the city would be willing to look at a further increase in the event of a request by citizens.
Does this become a conditional use?
I was going to say, I think the applicant would probably rather that we just go ahead and deal with his application now so that he can move on with his development, and then that's something we could look at a later time rather than tying the two together.
The reason I want to tie the two together is then it's done, and if someone wants to come in and go for more, there's already a provision that opens the door for it.
But people can always seek an amendment.
Let me speak on behalf of staffs and the burden they're carrying. There's other things on his plate that that he's going to be pressured to accomplish in the next few months. And if you were to make that part of your motion, I might invite somebody to come in right away and make that request. And you have directed us essentially to spend our time doing that. So I'm just a little anxious about what that might mean. Detracting Corey from other things he needs to be doing in the next few months. But if that's what you want to do, I guess I'll let Corey respond to that possibility, though.
As long as he's basking in the glow, we can get away with anything, right?
If that's a concern to you, Councilman Inns, I would first debate the issue of whether this ordinance can pass. And then if you reach that conclusion, debate the issue of directing staff to further look at the tier system for that.
I thought the Planning Commission made a good point too, though, is that we are significantly increasing this. So on a 1 acre lot, you're going from 5,000 to 17,000. So why don't we just see how it works for a little while and then consider some amendments after that? There's another.
Okay, I withdraw my amendment.
That's
you
why
still had a
that's
motion,
why we
though.
debate these motions.
What is your motion then?
So I would make a motion to approve ordinance 2018-10 as it's written.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, starting with Councilman Ince.
Aye.
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 Motion passes 3-0. Yes, did you have something?
Now,
you
that
wanna say?
said, if anybody brings an amendment, obviously, staff responds to any application, which I think people would have a right to seek an amendment anyway, so.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. On to item number 5. This is going to be a public hearing. Everybody leaves us as the meeting goes on. We get lonely.
Because it's municipal code, you know.
That's right.
That term alone. Sorry, Lisa, I know.
Cemetery.
Thanks for saying that, Councilman McEwen, because I was going to read 4 again. Municipal Code Amendment, this is the cemetery marker and monument restrictions, and we have staff of Bruce Cox to present on this.
So this is an item that we had already talked about, 2 recommendations from staff on the extra spaces that we've been able to find with more careful analysis of the existing cemetery. We're able to find that there are some spaces that do not show up on our computer program, and in these extra spaces, we're recommending that as you've chosen to sell them, that you also put a restriction that they put a flat stone only on these extra spaces, so not to incur greater cost upon the city, as they won't be able to dig future graves, and they'll have to have those stones moved in order to dig graves. So staff's recommendation is to the new spaces that are being made available would be flat stones only. And I might add also, other cities have dealt with this issue in their ordinances by saying for every 4 spaces an individual has burial rights on, they only allow 1 upright stone on the 4 spaces. And we don't have an ordinance like that at all. And so I would recommend that if these extra spaces that you leave that flat stone there, so we can have access for just regular maintenance of mowing, and then also when it comes time to get a backhoe and a truck in to dig graves.
Now, Bruce, the action that's actually scheduled is the not allowing headstone to go in on these new spaces until actual burial.
And that was a second issue.
That was the other issue mentioned last time, and Bruce and I spoke yesterday, wasn't it, Bruce? That you and I spoke about this other issue of the flat stone, and we recognized that last time when we mentioned this, that there was some opposition to that, but Bruce and I are very concerned that if you allow these additional spaces to have upright stones, upright monuments, that you are increasing the future maintenance cost, the future cost of the city, because you will make it more necessary to remove and replace more upright stones in order to get to the remaining spaces. Who's going to bear that cost? We think it's fair that if you make it clear up front that you're going to sell these additional spaces with that restriction, then you really haven't taken a right from anybody. Those who own spaces now would still be able to have the upright monuments, but we do feel fairly strongly that if you allow upright monuments on these additional fill-in spaces, you're creating a future costly burden. Now, that's not the action scheduled tonight. The action scheduled is not allowing the headstone to go in until a burial occurs. But we would like you to reconsider the other one as well, and if you're inclined to support that, we would come back with that amendment in a future meeting.
I was going to say, I don't want to consider the other one tonight because we haven't done our research or homework or anything on the other one, so I'd like to stick tonight with, especially with only 3 council members here, on the action that we were given, which was not putting headstones up before you're there.
Sure. Sorry, I jumped the gun on that one, I guess.
Do you have more to say on the action?
If you'd like more explanation on that, just that the situation is that monument companies and mortuaries are encouraging people to plan ahead and encouraging them to buy their stones and buy their burial packages and have their flowers and their caskets and everything all taken care of in a pre-packaged deal, and by having their headstone made and put in the cemetery, they have it all taken care of. That all has to be done when they die is a monument company comes and either engraves the death date or takes it back and engraves it and brings it back. The problem is we then store their $10,000 stone for however many years it is until they pass away. The monument company makes all the money on selling that stone and that prepackaged deal, and the city bears the burden of mowing around it and edging around it, and if it gets damaged, dealing with the complaint, and there's not even anybody there. We're just storing their stone for them until they actually get buried. And we recommend that we require them to that we don't store their stones before they're needing them.
We probably get more complaints, too, from the ones that aren't underground.
You bet, because they're there to look at their stone and to see if there's any, mineral
The ones
marks
that are
or
under their stones
sprinkler,
don't know what we do to their
sprinkler
stones.
marks on them, and yeah, you bet. So I wouldn't discourage people from planning ahead, but I would say, hey, if you're going to sell someone a $2,000 to $5,000 or $10,000 monument, you need to include in that the storage price of that stone if you want to have it done now, or work into it where they pay in advance, but then the stone's not actually made until the time they need it. The same way what they do with the casket or what they do with the vault. They don't actually have the vault and the casket ready when you go pay for it. They wait until you actually need it before they order it and take care of it. And I would suggest they do the same with their monuments rather than bring them to Centerville Cemetery and store them here.
Any questions, further questions for Bruce? There's no, if not, there's no applicant on this, then that means that we move to the public hearing process. It's now open for a public hearing for any comments that the public wants to make on this. If no comments from the public, then I close the public hearing, and we go to if there's any further questions before a motion.
Well, I'm glad we didn't hear from any of those who are already using the cemetery.
Yeah.
Public comment portion.
That would have been eerie.
I'm in support of this. I think that it's appropriate that the stones be there when there's somebody in the grave. Having them just be there and be a cost for the city is not a good thing for us. I'm very much in support of making sure that the two match up together.
So do we have a motion on it?
I will motion that we approve ordinance 2018-09 marker and monument restrictions as recorded.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Let's do a roll call vote, starting with Councilman McEwen.
Aye.
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 The motion passes 3-0.
And Mayor, let me ask Bruce. Bruce, would you be inclined to ask council if they would, in a future meeting, continue the discussion about the other concern?
You bet. The issue is going to cost the city ongoing more money and more. You can't go back on someone later and say, you know what, we've got to dig that grave and these 3 stones are in the way for us to get any equipment in there. So we try to contact owners of those or family members of those 3 graves and headstones and tell them, yeah, we're going to have a monument company come and move those stones out of the way so we can dig the grave, and then they'll move them back, and you've got to fork out a couple $100 each. That's just not going to work. And so what will happen is the city will have to fork out a couple $100 each every time they have a stone moved.
But I think, excuse me, Bruce, but I think they want to discuss that at another time, probably, is what I was hearing.
Right.
I would like to ask one question. I don't think we can take action on it because it's not on the agenda, right?
Correct.
That's correct. We didn't make it public
I would be
notice.
interested in knowing of the stones in the cemetery today, percentage that are flat, percentage that are elevated. And then second one, of the stones that have gone in the past year or two,
Yeah.
percentage that are flat, percentage that are elevated.
Well, you know.
Do you know that number?
Well, just a good example of that is Plot E, which is the farthest north section that we opened 7 years ago. We divided it all up, surveyed it, and it was just trees and grass, and we decided to open that up to bolster our perpetual care fund. And we put in the first 5 rows are double depth graves, and then the top, the middle and east section is all single graves, which are all sold, all but maybe a couple. You can see every single space has got an upright stone. There's not a single flat one that's gone in the last 7 years. So yeah, the trend is that flat stones are not popular right now. So it would not be. And the flat ones are pretty much older stones. Most of them are older. You know, when I say older, be older than 1990 and 1980s and 70s. That back then, it's still flat stones were.
But Bruce, we also have a section that is on the slope that we require flat stones only, and those sold out because when you had a limited supply, those sold out, right?
Right. So flat. Yeah, so our cemetery, they've started off, you know, we've had a Plot A, and Plot A has pioneer upright monuments and things, but they said, you know, these cost quite a bit, and there's a lot of liability, and they're difficult to maintain around. So as we open Plot B, we're going to make it flat stones only. Well, that's fine, but then when all of Plot A was sold out and all that was left is Plot B, people came and said, hey, we would really like a monument to be up and tall and to honor our loved one. And so then the city council said, okay, we're going to now allow uprights in Plot B, but Plot C, we're going to keep that flat stone only because it makes sense. It costs us less money to maintain, and we're going to make that flat stone only. Which was fine until years down the road, new city council, no more space in Plot A or B. Plot C now is upright stones, and now we're down to where the slope to hillside is flat stones only, and
we've stuck to that one.
And we've stuck to that one so far, but we're only a few city councils into it.
And I guess my point, Bruce, was that yes, people prefer upright headstones, but when you have limited spaces, and that's the choice basically that's left, they will still sell.
Yeah.
Like Section
D.
D.
Yeah, you won't.
You know,
Centerville's not worried about selling their spaces. They have limited spaces as it is. So,
there has to be thought on this modern day cemetery planning, because I was by a brand new cemetery down in St. George, the Totokan Cemetery, and it was fascinating to look. One row of uprights, one row of flat, one row of uprights, one row of flats, and all throughout the whole cemetery. And this is a 10-year-old or less cemetery, so I'm sure they're doing that.
You bet.
From a standpoint of, hey, if people want uprights, you have that chance, but for maintenance purposes, it allows maintenance vehicles to get in and not run over headstones.
Right. So yeah, as they're building new cemeteries, you bet they build in. Hey, we realize the mistakes of the past of putting in, allowing all uprights everywhere, and so that's why you see these other ordinances that say, hey, this has ended up costing our city and our citizens. When the cemetery is completely sold out, you'll still have citizens having to pay tax dollars to move other people's stones in a cemetery that they can't even buy a space in.
So I have a question. Could you maybe look at the cemetery and figure out, kind of like he said, an area that you're going to, so that we had a way in through the cemetery into each place, so that maybe we wouldn't have to not allow any, but if you buy into this area, it's flat stones because that's the area that we're using to drive in.
That's a wonderful idea for a brand new cemetery as we design it, much like Tonnequint, where they do every other row. We already are facing the difficulties where the city will already have to pay money to have some stones moved. The more spaces you sell and these more gaps that you allow more stones to be put in, you're just increasing that liability of how much more money you're going to be spending as a city to move stones. So no, there isn't anywhere right now that you could leave a pathway in the existing cemetery. Like I say, it's already a problem, and we're just trying to minimize how much bigger a problem it would be by saying, you know what, by filling in all of these gaps, at least if you leave them flat stones, give yourself some more access. But we've already kind of
The horse is
ship
out of
has
the
sailed,
barn.
so to speak.
The horse is out of the barn.
Yeah. Right.
So should we be charging a different price if someone wants to put in an upright stone?
We do. There's no fee for a flat stone, and there's $100 fee if they put it up.
$100 is nothing. Maybe $1,000 is worth doing.
And that was put in place when they opened up Plat C to upright stones. Went from flat onlys to upright. They said, well, we'll add on an extra $100.
I was thinking the same thing, Bill, in terms of like a congestion area fee. If you want one in this area, that the perpetual care fund is going to need more to keep that.
Yeah.
I was going to say that. I don't think you can go back to the people that have already purchased, but the ones we're talking about, we might be able to have a surcharge put on if somebody really wants it bad enough to pay.
I'd say anything that's not opened.
Yeah.
Food for thought, Bruce. We could continue on this, but we will.
We don't have enough council people here.
We'll continue to defer to council meeting, but thank you for your. Let's move on then on our agenda to item 6. This is a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant contract for Island View Park renovation phase 1. I have down here, Bruce, that you may be addressing this, and maybe somebody from the Parks Committee, Lynn Keddington.
We have Lynn, our chairman,
as well too. Great. So welcome, Lynn. Thanks for being here. So however you guys want to discuss that. I don't know if you want to both be at the mic or you're taking it, Bruce. So it looks like you're taking it, so go ahead.
So I believe the contract is before you, and it's just whether or not you want to accept the contract and accept this 600 and, what's the exact number, $677,000 matching grant.
Of which the state will keep 64,000 or something like that, as I recall.
Administrative costs are $64,476.
Right.
And we have 2 years?
2 years from when they sent us the contract, right, Bruce? Which was in March?
Was it March 30?
Sometime,
I think it was March 30th.
In March. Yeah. Sometime in March when they sent it, the feds sent it back to the state, right?
Right.
Okay.
What's the execution deadline on this contract?
You mean how soon we have to approve it?
Right, because due to the substantial nature of the funds, I would prefer that it's a roll call of the entire council.
Yeah, I don't see a problem delaying it till next time, for example, if that's what you'd like.
As far as your 2 years, that time's already ticking, and we weren't planning to start construction on it right away anyway. So.
But his question would be a timeline for the council to approve. If they delayed this till next time, that's no problem, is it?
I don't think it changes anything.
So if they delayed it to a council meeting 2 weeks down the road, or it would be okay?
Yeah,
I think that's Councilman McEwen's concern.
Yeah, that sounds wise. I don't think it changes anything as far as our timeline or anything else.
I just want to make sure we didn't overrun some sort of contractual obligation that we had to be executed by June 1 or whatever that date would be.
I don't know of any of that.
I don't know of anything either. Yeah.
Then I would motion we table this to the next regularly scheduled council meeting to allow for a roll call vote of the entire council.
Second.
A motion and a second. Do I have to do a roll call here?
Before we vote on that, can I ask a question?
Sure, you can debate the motion.
No, I don't want to debate the motion. I want to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because once we finish the motion, then the discussion's over, right?
Correct.
Lisa, do you have any concerns about the contract?
It will be difficult to administer. There's a lot of detail in there, but certainly it's up to the council on if you want these funds. You just have to make sure that someone administers the contract and meets the deadlines and understands the restrictions. But other than that, no.
Is that someone you?
No.
No, that's going to be, as I see it, that's going to be a Jake and Bruce team. seeing that we meet the administrative guidelines on this, the regulations.
With Lisa overseeing it.
But there's, contract clauses that have to go into our bid documents and in our final award and things like that. So, yeah, it really needs
If you hire an
oversight.
architectural firm, a landscape architectural firm for the design that has experience with these federal grants, which many of them do, I think that would be one of the things you'd look for in qualifications for the company that you're going to have do the design. That will be very helpful, but it will mean some administrative burden for
Do
this
you want me to
grant.
give you my list? They're procurement procedure requirements, so we have to follow our own procedural requirements and some additional ones. Mandatory contract clauses, compliance with more federal acts than I can name, minority recruitment requirements, undergrounding and power line requirements, earned interest restrictions, financial reporting requirements, requiring a separate ledger project, public records recording requirements, etc.
So the
Proceed with
64,000
care
sounds
and make
reasonable?
sure you calendar key dates.
Now, I will note the additional federal provisions also apply to your other federal grants. Your CLG grant, for example.
So we have experience in that, and we just need to monitor it. But it's a lot of money, so they want to make sure that we.
Yeah, if
are-
we were talking $100,000, you'd have to, in my mind, really question the value of the burden you're taking on. But if you're talking over $600,000, then, in my opinion, it's worth taking on the burden.
My only concern in that would be is when we get to this final portion, considering what we've just experienced with the Army Corps of Engineers related to Community Park, are there any specters of potential problems with the Army Corps if we accept this money?
Wetlands issues?
No,
Yeah.
not on this site. And this site already had a land and water conservation fund grant to originally be built, so we're actually already under those rules and restrictions and have been for 40 years.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Is there anything else the Army Corps could bring up, or any other organization?
The restrictions are that the grant requires, you wouldn't be able to do anything else there once you decide. You ran into this already when you talked about, hey, could we make it into a cemetery, or could we put a cell tower in the back lot, and those kinds of things are out of the question.
Unless it has a slide on the cell tower.
Zip line.
Now, let me speak from some experience here. When I first became a city manager 35 years ago, I came into a city where they had not kept good records for a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. And it was a nightmare reconstructing the records to finally get our money back from the federal government. But that town did not have proper accounting system in place. I'm not concerned about us keeping proper accounting records in this case. We have a section of the ledger that will have the proper accounting, and I'm just not worried about that. But it will require us to pay attention and understand what the requirements are. But I'm not worried that we can't comply.
And I'll mention this again next time as well when the other council members are present. My primary concern with expenditures on this project is if we cost overrun and we're required to have X number of amenities based on the site plan, where we come up with the extra money. Because if we cost overrun significantly, let's say 10, 20% on this project, maybe we won't, but let's say we did. As far as I understand the way that this process is, this grant is, we cannot delete amenities from the plan. It is for the amenities stated.
Yeah, you can scale them back. You can put in less expensive playground equipment. You can do some things for sure to cut your costs if you need to. But if you say you're going to put in a playground, you have to put in a playground, whether it's a $200,000 playground or a $100,000 playground. You can play with it that way.
And so during the design, he draws the design to a close, as developing the design, the cost estimates would be important to keep in mind.
You bet.
Especially as you get into the end of the design period, what does that current cost at that time look like? And do we need to alter some, as he has said, scale back any of those amenities in some way?
We took that into account with our application. For example, in the parking lot, we didn't put in a specific number of spaces that we put into our application. We just put in this area will be a parking lot, and it's a conceptual plan, so it's not an exact square footage. Had we put in 15 spaces, we would have to put in 15 spaces. So
when I look at the budget narrative that adds up to the 1.3 million, are we stuck to doing those things on that budget with this grant?
As far as can you do more, you can do more. You can do different things. You can, upscale things if you want, but you have to do at a minimum what the conceptual plan says you're going to do. So
He's looking at this document that we're going to pull up, Bruce. Just a second here.
Those total project costs will come down to $1,354,000, which is on the front page, that same figure. So my question is, are we locked in to doing those items? Let's say, for instance, and this is a shameless plug, I guess, but you wanted to do a pickleball court instead of a tennis court. Could you do that? Or are you locked into?
You're locked into a tennis court. Where if it says tennis court on our, which I think it does, we have to do those 2 tennis courts. You could do, in addition to those 2 tennis courts, you could do pickleball courts. You could paint pickleball lines on your tennis courts and make them multi-use, but they have to be, if you say you're going to put in 2 tennis courts, you've got to put in 2 tennis courts. And it does say that in the conceptual plan that we're putting in 2 tennis courts. As far as the actual prices, though, when they were working these up, we had put in a contingency buffer at the bottom, and the application would not allow for a contingency. And so we worked that into, we split it up amongst all of these cost estimates. So in our cost estimates, we've worked in some contingency issues for some overrun and stuff like that.
Can we see the cost estimates redone then? That when we come back and redo this next meeting, could you bring us the update of that original before the contingency funds were allocated to the individual lines?
I think we've got that. Yeah, I think we've got the.
I would like to see.
Because what it was it Steve? Do you remember? Was it 10 or 20%? I can't remember what the contingency was, but it was 20%.
I was thinking 20%.
I think it was 20%. So basically, if you just reduce all these numbers by 20%, that's what we did. We just increased them all by 20%.
Well, let's check that, though, to see if that was the fact.
Check that and see it when we do the actual meeting.
Because when we get to the vote portion, my expectation is I'm looking in bold at a hard cap. I'm not looking at a soft cap for the project.
Yeah. Okay, I think you got through with my questions. You have a vote now.
And I hope that by being that firm on a hard cap, that it doesn't say, well, it's a tennis court that's now just a clay surface with some spray paint on it because we ran out of funds. I want it to be a good project.
Well, for example, Bruce, I assume that you got $84,000 for a picnic pavilion. Well, we just awarded a bid, and they're going to build something for no more than $50,000.
Right.
So you could downsize and.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fairly confident there's wiggle room in there. I just want to make sure that we,
just like to see,
given the other projects we have going, we can't overrun this one.
Yeah. Well, we're still waiting to know what the Army Corps what's going to cost us to buy wetlands in a bank somewhere else. I'm still waiting for their response, by the way.
That's a good point.
Don't call them.
No, I'm not.
I'd rather know how much before we commit, if we can.
Okay, are we back to our motion then? Bruce, you're looking at that like you're going to tell us something.
No.
Reveal all that you want to reveal. Okay.
Some of this is going to be rehashed next time too.
Okay, so let's go back to our motion. What you want to state it again for us, Councilman Ince?
George.
Oh,
my
George,
motion.
I'm sorry, Councilman
We'll
McEwen.
table this to the next regularly scheduled council meeting so that we can have a vote by the entire council.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, I don't have to do a roll call there, I don't think, so. Okay, on to, thank you, Bruce. Thanks, Lynn, thanks for all the work you do with the Parks and Rec Department. Do you want to tell us anything else we need to know on this, or?
No, as long as there's no penalty for not approving or signing the contract, it doesn't really matter. I mean, apparently there is no deadline to sign that contract, is that correct?
Would you connect Bruce with Susan and guarantee
I
that?
mean, that's only my concern is that if you put it off and we lose the opportunity to sign the contract, that we miss the deadline. If there's no deadline in it, I have no problem.
Will you make sure that that's checked on, because if we had to, we could call a quick meeting.
Yeah, I'll call Susan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lynn, for all the work you do as chair of the committee. And thank you, Bruce. All right, on to item seven, sorry. This is awarding the bid for the 2018 pavement crack seal and slurry seal project, I think.
Bring up the,
Steve gave
results.
Kevin Campbell a pass on this one, being here tonight, and you're going to present on it, right?
yes.
Okay.
So each year, we typically have 2 bid awards relating to streets maintenance. One is crack seal and slurry seal, and the other is asphalt overlay and reconstruction. We opened the asphalt overlay bid sometime back and told you we were going to hold that until we had this bid as well, so that we could evaluate, well, for 2 reasons we held that earlier bid. We had 60 days to award it, by the way, which allows us to go to May 15 to award that other bid. We wanted to delay the award of the other bid for 2 reasons. One was to get this one in hand so that we could look at both of them and compare them to our revenues that are available for this purpose, and see if we wanted, could it possibly enlarge the scope of work for one or the other bid. But the other reason for delaying that other bid was to improve the chances that there can be better coordination between the 2 frontage road projects. That other bid includes the frontage road project, the local version of the frontage road project. Then there's the federal versions yet to be bid. And by delaying that other bid, we get it closer in time to when the other one's going to bid, in hopes that the work by the 2 contractors, if they happen to be 2 different contractors, can the coordination can be improved. I mean, our best scenario is that the same contractor will get the federal bid, as is the low bidder on our local bid for the paving work. We still want to wait till the 15th for that other one, and I was assuming until a few days ago that we would wait until then to award this bid. But Kevin called me on Friday afternoon and he said, we want to go ahead and award this one because the temperatures in May are the best time to do crack seal and slurry seal. I think we still have the ability to expand the scope of either bid at a later time. But tonight, if you go ahead and award this bid at the scope that it was bid at, then Kevin and I and Randy will be meeting this Thursday, looking at the big picture, the revenues that are available, and the cost of these 2 bids. And when we come back with that other bid next time, we may have a recommendation to only, we can add some additional work on this one or on that one. So did I just confuse it?
No.
Okay.
But you said the 15th, that puts it off a close.
To the 60 days? Yeah, and toward later in May is the end of the 60-day period that those other bids
so
are.
it's not May 15th, I thought you were saying May 15th.
May 15 is the next council meeting. That's your last council meeting before the 60 days expires. But it is some days after that.
I misunderstood.
Yeah. So the other document that we added today was this second one. If you want to know or be able to answer questions of your constituents, well, which streets are going to be crack sealed, which ones are slurry sealed, and of the slurry sealed, which ones are type 2 and which ones are type 3. That's what this document does. Jake, if you go to page 2 is I think labeled crack seal at the bottom. Or, yeah, crack seal. So if you, it's the streets that are grayed that show which ones are getting crack seal. And a big chunk of it is happening in the south part of the city. And if you go to the next page, I think it's type 2 slurry seal. You look at the bottom of that page, Jake, right there. Yeah, type 2 slurry seal. And this will be primarily cul-de-sacs. Type 2 slurry seal has a finer aggregate. We're trying to be responsive to the complaints we've got in the past from folks in cul-de-sacs who say, hey.
It piles up pretty tall.
Yeah. And then the next page is type 3 slurry seal, and that's on your through roads. So the grade roads on this page will get the type 3 slurry seal. So you have the tool now that if somebody asks you, is my street on it, you can go to this and look at it. Okay. Just for a general understanding, how often do we how often do we crack seal and slurry seal? Kevin says that our guide on crack seal is every 3 to 5 years. And on slurry seal, it's every 7 to 10 years. So generally speaking, you're going to have 2 crack sealings in between every slurry seal that a street receives. And pavement overlays are more like 20 years. And then a rebuild, of course, is even further out than that. You put on at least 1 overlay before you rebuild, and maybe 2. Especially if you can mill down the edges, you could get a second overlay possibly on a street. But what we're trying to do with the aggressive use of crack seal and slurry seal is to push out the date, extend the time when you need to overlay a street, and extend the time that you have to rebuild it. Questions?
I don't have any. This was very straightforward. Actually, I'd like to request for a future meeting that we bring back up sidewalks and talk about where we're going to go on that as far as the maintenance program.
So you'll be in the budget work sessions if you want to address that issue.
I think it'd be a great place for that, to address that, because that is becoming a topic of discussion. So I'd like to, as we're heading into the season and some of our yellows are probably heading into a brighter yellow color as they're getting bigger, I'd like to put that on a future agenda to talk about.
Okay, so we could have the work session discussion related to budget, but are you also wanting to discuss the policy issues that we have postponed?
Correct.
Okay.
So as a future item, since we're talking about maintenance, it's not quite on the agenda, but I thought I'd shoehorn that in.
Thank you, George. Councilman McEwen. So do we have a motion on this then, on this bid?
Motion to award the bid per the city engineer to Intermountain Slurry Seal for $478,050.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to second. Let's do a roll call vote with Councilman Ince first.
Aye.
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 That motion passes 3-0. Thank you. Moving on to item number 8 on our agenda. This is the fiscal year 2019 proposed budget. Presentation by the city manager.
What if we have a quick break before we go into that?
Is everyone okay with the break? Okay, we will break before we go into that.